Hi guys, I wanted to help you a little bit with your lab report for this week. So I want to show you steps that you could take if you don't want to handwrite your data tables and handwrite a graph of your results. I want to show you how you can use Google Sheets to do it instead, and I think it will go a lot faster. So if you have your assignment open for week 5, which is right here, the data for your lab that you did last week is right here. So I'm going to click that to open that up. And here is your data. This is all the data. I took all the data that you wrote down and I entered it into this Google Sheet. So if you type your lab report, you could just copy and paste. So copy this, I've highlighted, and you can copy it and paste it right into whatever document you're working on for your lab report, and that would go in your data section. In your analysis section is where you would make a graph of this. Now, this is a view only document, which just means you can't make changes to it. So if you want to make a graph, you need to have your own copy of this. So what you're going to want to do is sign in to a Gmail account. Hopefully you or someone in your household has a Gmail account. And you'll go up to File, and under File, you'll see Make a Copy. And so you'll click on Make a Copy, and you see now it's making copy of floating filter paper chips data. And then you can click OK, and then you'll have a copy, and you'll be able to edit that. Okay, so now that you're in a copy of this data that you can edit, let's go ahead and make a graph of this information. So let's start with making a graph that shows what happened to how long it took for a chip to float to the top when we had different amounts of hydrogen peroxide. So I go ahead and highlight the cells that I wanted to graph. So I highlighted the number of drops of hydrogen peroxide that were added and the time it took to float. Okay, now I'm going to go over here to this little symbol, which is Insert Chart. Okay, and it's going to give us some recommendations. I usually skip over the recommendations and go right here to Chart Type. Now, once you're under chart types, there are lots of choices for you. And really, for this lab, you're free to choose whichever options you have, whatever you feel like shows the results the best. Now, what I find, I was looking at line, and none of these things were checked. So all of these were blank, these check boxes, and I did not like how it was showing the data. So I did some experimenting, and I hit show column or use column B as labels, and that did pretty well in showing me a graph that I wanted, although I noticed this didn't have it didn't tell us what this blue line means. So when I clicked use row 2 as headers, yes, it told me what it means. It's the time that it took to float to the top. And so I liked that. And I started clicking around, though. I still kind of liked, I wanted it to be separate because, you know, I did each of my trials separately. So then I tried this graph, and I kind of like this. So the first 2 trials, when there were no extra hydrogen peroxide added, this was the time that it took. And then this tells us all the other numbers of drops of hydrogen peroxide added. And that looked good. And you'll see here is the seconds. And remember, in general, when you're graphing, you want your independent variable, which in this case was the number of drops of hydrogen peroxide added. That's your independent variable. And your dependent variable, which is the results you're looking for, you want them to be on your y-axis. And that's the number of seconds. It's how long it took for our paper chip to float to the top. Then the last thing that you want to do when you're making this graph is to go to customization, and under here I'm going to give it a title. So in this case, sometimes they give you a suggested title, but I would like to change it. So let's call it going to call it the rate of reaction with different amounts of hydrogen peroxide. Kind of a long title, but it tells us how fast, how did my chip change and how fast it came up when I was doing my experiment. The other thing that I would like you to put on here is if you scroll down under the axis, the horizontal axis, so that's this one, I need to give it a title. I need to know what those numbers stand for. And they stand for the number of drops of extra hydrogen peroxide. Okay, and I hit enter, and look there, it shows up on my graph. And this, my vertical axes, or my y-axes, I need to give that a title too, and those are measured in seconds. Okay, so now I have a label. That way I know what everything on my graph represents. So now you're all set with this graph, and all you have to do is hit insert, and you're all set. Now you can move this if you want to, so that it's not going over your data tables. And then you can repeat this again for different temperatures and then also for different pHs. Now I have to say, when you have to talk about what are the trends that you see or the oddities, in this one, I don't really see much of a trend. It's more odd in that I would expect no extra hydrogen peroxide to give me the longest rates, and the more drops I add, the faster I should expect my chip to float to the top. So that's one of the things you could talk about where your results didn't turn out the way you expected. We can quickly look at the other data, like pH. And I noticed here we added base to these, but we didn't add enough base to make it really basic. We actually added enough base to make it close to neutral. And this does kind of have a trend. So let's take a quick look at this. I'm going to highlight what I want to graph and go up to Insert Chart, pick my chart types, and I'm going to again use column B as labels. And let's go back to this one. And I do notice a trend here. It's that as it got closer to neutral, my reaction happened faster, right? The lower my bar, the faster my chip floated up to the top. This only took 19 seconds to float to the top, whereas this one took 42 seconds to float to the top. So this graph shows me a trend, and it shows me a trend that the closer my pH got to neutral, the faster my chips floated to the top. Well, I hope that helps as you are working on this lab, and always you can email me if you have any questions.